and all the rot and the old beams are history.
Woohoo!
It's going pretty well.
Yay! It does feel like a milestone, like an end to a chapter. In the tall trees where the coyotes howl and the frogs sing into the night, there is a big metal shed, and inside is a boat. That boat is where this story takes place. This episode is an exciting one. It's the end to a chapter, a success story of a kind, a moment of satisfaction after weeks of work. Well, almost. We weren't there quite yet. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Boatyard. This is a very exciting episode. It's perhaps a culmination of many of our previous episodes in which we've been producing all of these new deck beams. Quick recap. For the past several weeks, we've been laminating, custom fitting, and finishing deck beams for our Cape George 36 sailboat. Our old deck beams had fallen prey to rot, so we had to replace all the ones which are highlighted in yellow in this diagram. We had started with the short beams, the ones that run under the side decks, and we were now nearly ready to install them. But we do have one last final step before we put them in place, and that is adding some epoxy to the carlin. The carlin is the beam that runs longitudinally along the boat. It's what the deck beams sit in. It's what supports the cabin top, and it's a very important structural beam. And right now it's bare wood, so we're just adding a coat of clear epoxy. Okay, Aladino's getting started already behind me, so I need to film him what he's doing, and then I'll pick up a brush and help as well.
So the first preparations, of course, it always starts with sanding. So I did that yesterday. It's a little complicated as we are doing this step by step. So this beam will come out. That's why I've taped around it.
Well, yeah, right, because we can't take out all the beams at once, otherwise our cabin top will collapse. So we're staggering the beams that we remove and replace.
Exactly.
And once we've got these new ones fitted where the blue tape is, then we can remove these other ones and replace those. It would still be several days before all our short beams were in place, but we were looking forward to installing some of them pretty soon. In the meantime, the carlin was looking pretty good with its fresh epoxy. So now we have to wait for that to dry and then to apply a second coat, but let's go downstairs and have a look at the beams which are all ready to be slotted into place as soon as this carlin is coated and ready to go. So this is one of the beams that's ready to go. It's cut to size, and of course each beam is slightly different from the other, so there's markings so we know which beam is supposed to go where. Each one has to be custom sized. We've got the holes drilled for the carriage bolts. This has 3 coats of epoxy on it, and we did one final sanding, which is why it's got this matte look right now. Pretty soon it would be time to install this beam on the boat.
Well, the big moment has come. The first beam is going into place. Can I start applying?
Aladino applied the thickened epoxy mixture to the overhead, and I waited outside, ready to help in positioning the beam. And of course, protecting the beam is key, since of course we don't want to ruin the finish that we just spent all this time on. So, rubber mallets, wood blocks to put in between the beam and the hammer where necessary. All of that will be used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, where's the beam?
I've got it. Do you want it?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's me.
Aladino slid the beam into place, gently tapping it into position with a white rubber mallet so as not to leave marks. Are you ready for it to be driven into the carlin?
Yeah.
We had to drive the beam into its slot on the carlin. It's an intentionally tight fit, so I used wedges and a mallet to gently guide it in while Aladino kept an eye on things from inside.
Wait a moment. Go slowly. Squeezing epoxy out. Alright.
When the beam was in position, Aladino put a screw into the end and wiped off the epoxy squeeze out. It was done. The first beam was in position. Now, we just had to repeat this same procedure several more times. So, we're done.
Wow.
Well, we still had some fasteners to include, some screws and carriage bolts, but effectively, we were done. Well, one beam, anyway. That didn't take too long, hey?
Well, it was a few weeks of prep work.
Yeah.
That's what takes long.
Yeah.
Very cool. High five.
We've got a new beam. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes, 1 of 25.
Well, we've got several others ready to install.
We could put 7 in place today.
All right, let's do that then. By the end of the day, 7 in place.
4.
Okay. Why not shoot for the stars?
25. All right, cool. Let's continue.
I'm going to mix some more epoxy. We're just making a very small quantity of epoxy for each beam. And the number one thing with epoxy is to mix it extremely thoroughly. If there's anything I've learned from this process is that epoxy is an art in and of itself. It's crazy. I mean, there's literally books written on it. Many of those books Aladino has read. To be honest, I like knowing about this stuff for its practical reasons, but it does not bring me necessarily joy to read about it. I think Aladino actually finds joy in the topic. I do not. I find joy in other things, like music, and books, and sailing, and films. There we go. Quick and very fun Canadian tune. Real Beatrice by Natalie McMaster. How to kill time, well, with stirring epoxy. List all the things you like. Think about all the things that you enjoy doing. Hopefully it's a long list. And by the time you're done, your epoxy should be ready. And now that the epoxy is ready doesn't necessarily mean it's finished, because for this particular application we are adding fillers. A little bit of cotton, a little bit of sawdust for color. Meanwhile, in the boat, Aladino is preparing the next beam. Alright, that looks about good. Let's go upstairs. Aladino?
Looks well mixed.
Oh, I brought you gloves.
7? Starboard? No, that's the number 9 first.
You want to start with 9? Alright. We had given each beam a number to help us identify them. Such a color difference to the originals.
Oh yeah.
The original beams are made out of Port Orford cedar, whereas the beams that we're making are made out of Alaska yellow cedar, and that's partly due to availability and partly also due to its characteristics. They do have very, very similar characteristics, but the Port Orford cedar is much harder to come by at the moment. And the Alaska yellow cedar is a really good substitute, and some actually say a better substitute because apparently it's clear vertical grain is a bit easier to find. Apparently the Port Orford can be a bit squirrelier.
I would agree.
I mean, we actually debated for a while if we were going to stain the Alaska yellow cedar to have a uniform look. But yeah, we decided against the stain for a few reasons. First of all, epoxy does not usually play well with stains, and there are stains that epoxy does play well with, and we did get one stain to see if epoxy would stick to it, and it sort of stuck, but in our tests just did not stick nearly as well as it does to bare wood. The other thing is that I think there's something really nice about showcasing the natural wood and not hiding its color, and there's also something very interesting about showing the repairs and being proud of the repairs. These repairs are now a really huge part of this boat's story.
All right, let's do number 7.
Number 7. Number 4 in actuality. This was satisfying work. After all the painstaking laminating, shaping, and epoxying that we'd done over the previous weeks, the installation was a breeze. Delayed gratification is definitely a huge part of boat work, but the gratification part of things was finally unfolding. Thank goodness. So we have 4 beams in place now, and we have 3 more that we can put in place today. But I don't think I'm going to bring the camera for the next 3. So we'll touch base with you again once all 7 beams have been installed. Alright, the beams are in. Now we only actually put in 6 because we realized that the 7th is actually located in the head and we forgot to epoxy the carlin there. So we'll do that before we install the 7th. But we've got all 6 in now. It went quite smoothly and it didn't take too long. So now the final step is to put some screws in through the deck. I was hesitant about this step, as I thought that introducing new holes into our perfectly epoxied beams may just be a new way for water to one day find its way in. However, these plywood decks will also be liberally coated in epoxy and fiberglass, creating a solid waterproof layer with excellent adhesion. The previous fiberglass sheathing that we peeled off was done with polyester resin, which is known to not adhere to wood, and not to be entirely waterproof either. With epoxy, those 2 problems are solved. Plus, we're not really installing any screws through the fiberglass sheathing, and if we do have to for some reason, then we'll overdrill and fill with epoxy to avoid any chance for water intrusion to the wood below. This boat is going to be watertight if it's the last thing we do.
One long drill to get the length of the screw, one thicker drill which gets the diameter of the screw and just through the plywood because you don't want to screw the grip there, one countersink for the head to disappear, and then the impact driver to put them in. The only thing missing. Probably on everything you can say that, but for now it's the carriage bolt. But I just want to let the epoxy cure for now, and we come back tomorrow, drill through the beam shelf, and then we can install the carriage bolt.
Time for some carriage bolt refurbishment. These are the bolts that we removed from the old beams. At first we considered replacing them, but after finding out that they cost $10 a piece, we figured it was more prudent to refurbish the ones we have. The process started on the bench grinder to get a bit of a shine and to clean up the threads.
Another thing I do next is cleaning up the threads a little further, and I do so with a... Is this the tap or the die?
I don't know.
I know it's a tap and a die. I don't know which one is which. It doesn't say. This is a die. This is a tap. I go for that.
Okay.
I'm not creating a thread out of a rod. I am just cleaning up this thread a little bit. So I just pass this bolt through. Next step, they are going into this salsa cup. It's just a container and I will fill it with distilled water, and then they soak for a day, and that is just to dissolve any impurities, acids or whatever.
Carriage bolt time.
Carriage bolt time. I had to try different things. The drill bit 3/8 that I need is too short, and I need to get it the guidance of the hole that is in the beam, so I cannot go from below. So what I've tried after the drill is the vice grips, and this does actually work. I've done one like this with the vice grip. But I mean, instead of doing it like that and taking 45 minutes for everyone or half an hour, we would just go to town and pick up a longer drill. But now this one works. And I've made this little AYC plug just to drive in the bolts. So, washer, clip, and nut. I was thinking of getting acorn nuts first, because they have such a nice round head and finish, but then you would have to trim the bolt to the exact length, and this is way easier, and this is how it was before, so it will do.
Yay. We repeated the process until all our new beams were in place, but we were far from done. Now that we had the structural support of the new beams, we could finally remove all the rest of the old beams and fit new ones in their place. But by now, at least we had a system all set up, so production would be much quicker. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back. It's actually been several days since we've turned a camera on in this boat shed. We have just been going ahead with beam production, and we've now got about 4 more ready to be epoxied. And in case you're curious about why we have flowers in the workshop, my best friend from home sent me a pot of flowers. She got them delivered, and I thought it was the nicest thing in the world, and they're such beautiful flowers. And so they've made their way into the workshop, and they bring me a lot of happiness. So Emily, thank you so much. You are truly a gem.
Yes, thank you.
I am lucky to have a friend like that.
Very nice.
So here's the flowers, here's the beams, there's the birds singing relentlessly. Let's just keep at it.
Let's do it.
Ready! Personally, I find the contrast between the workshop setting and the yellow vase of flowers makes me extremely happy, especially when combined with this task of rounding over the edges of the beams, which really serves no purpose other than to look good. I mean, sure, you could make the case that sharper edges can snag on things or not hold epoxy as well, but let's be real, this was an aesthetic choice and it's one I'm really happy about. So the work continued for several more days. We spent hours prepping surfaces, adding epoxy coats, and then repeating the installation process with each new beam until, at the very end, every new short beam was in place. We did it, everyone! We had set out to replace nearly half of our deck beams, and we had accomplished that task. The remaining original beams that were in good enough shape to stay would get coated with epoxy and varnish to protect them in the future. This felt like a major milestone. And it's pretty satisfying. To be completely honest, Aladino and I have had several discussions over the past few days about whether or not, since we're at this stage, why don't we just replace all the beams so that they all kind of look the same. But it's really not necessary. So many of the beams are in totally adequate condition and there's no point in ripping them out and replacing them just because we can. So I think we're calling it at this. But of course, even though this did feel really good, the work was far from over. Although we had finished the short beams, we still had bulkhead beams and some full-size beams to replace. Our bulkheads have also suffered some rot, so that's kind of a new topic, and we're gonna get into that topic in the next episode. There's still so much to do, but this does feel like a preview of the end. Just imagine when everything is gleaming with varnish or painted a beautiful white, when we've got lighting fixtures installed to make things gleam and sparkle, when the interior is filled with warmth and books and music, when the port lights look out onto an expanse of blue ocean and sky. This preview has gotten my imagination spinning and my excitement at an all-time high. I just think that this may be possible in the end. Thank you everyone for watching. We so appreciate your support, your comments, and for getting involved in the project. Huge thanks to our patrons for making all these episodes possible. We really, really appreciate your support. Extra big thanks to these folks who always go above and beyond to make sure that Magic Carpet keeps being produced. We'll see you all in the next episode.